listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have another great show for you today. There is considerable political news occurring domestically, and in the first hour, we're going to dive right in. I noted yesterday that the New York Democratic Party expunged Sanders from the ballot and nixed the state's Democratic primary in its entirety. In response, Sanders sent a strongly worded letter to the New York Board of Elections. Now, Andrew Yang, on the other hand, actually filed a lawsuit on Monday against the Democratic Party for canceling that election. An election that wasn't supposed to be, an election that wasn't canceled, that went by in somewhat of a whisper, was a primary that took place yesterday in Ohio. We're going to get the results in this election, in addition to a rather disorienting story among Sanders' top advisors, Weaver, and Rocha, forming a super PAC to con lefties and Hispanics to vote for one Joe Biden. I've argued that this is nothing less than betrayal of the left. Later in the first hour, we'll get into the precipitous drop in Trump's approval rating regarding his handling of the coronavirus. We knew these numbers had to fall at some point, between the loss of life, the infection rate compared to the rest of the world, and the policy of drastic, rugged individualism for a beleaguered public while dumping trillions into moneyed interests. In the second hour, we'll be joined by one of our favorite guests, journalist for the Gray Zone, Anya Prompil, to discuss the latest shakeup in Venezuela and the potential, if not expected, foreign and domestic policy agenda of one Biden administration. That's pretending that Biden wins. With Biden's swamp creature, Larry Summers, as his economic advisor, what would a recovery even look like under Biden, and what effect would this have, politically speaking, especially in the upcoming elections? That is going to be a great conversation. You don't want to miss that. Last but not least, it's Hump Day. Usually this day gives me an excuse to talk about UFOs, but today we're going to have somewhat of a detour, and we're going to get into a fascinating conversation on psychedelics. This notion of psychonauts, consciousness research, and the experiences of this particular individual that's going to come on to the show to discuss. Again, that is not something you want to miss for our Revelation segment. But let's start here. Before we go anywhere else, let's start here. The monologue always gets to the thing that bugs me the most or bothers me the most. And that is pretty easy for this morning. There are times where an image packs more of a punch than actually saying it. Meaning me telling you is a little bit different and less influential than me showing you. It's kind of like the argument of art, right? You get to see it in somewhat of a third-person perspective and either be horrified or identify with the person that you are observing. However cynical my point of view has gotten in regards to politics, however cynical my workable point of view has gotten in the way that I've evolved in this particular system, in this particular political climate, I have to be honest. I was ill-prepared for how bad the Democratic Party has been this election term, specifically for the last few months, especially around this argument of believing women. I mean, this is the party that was pushing the Me Too movement. This is the party that got rid of Al Franken. This is the party that went after Kavanaugh whole hog. But this is also the party that hypocritically has turned a blind eye to the allegations of assault being aimed at one Joe Biden. They've called Tara Reade a Russian plant. They've said that basically Trump supporters were effectively backing her story. The reality of it is a person was accused or a person was abused, ideally. At least that's her story. The person has had cooperating evidence from everything to her mom calling into Larry King, to neighbors explaining what she told them, even going into her experiences at the job itself, meaning around the exact same time that she noted this happened, she lost or left her responsibilities from working with Joe Biden. A few things happened yesterday. Joe Biden got a really big endorsement yesterday But you need to understand that this endorsement wasn't random. This endorsement was politically timed in order to cover the allegations that Tara Reade is putting forward, because those allegations have started to bubble up into the public's consciousness, either on mainstream media that tried to ignore it, or to various other political people who, again, also tried to ignore it. Yesterday, Joe Biden was having a conversation where he was trying to explain something. Let's hear the first clip of Joe Biden talking about economic intercourse before we get into the other stuff, because I want you to get an idea on what was taking place yesterday in the last few days as we led up into this. Let's hear Joe Biden mangle economic intercourse.
I would get much more engaged in the world. We can't step back. If, in fact, for example, we solve the problem in the United States of America and you don't solve it in other parts of the world, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have travel bans. You're going to not be able to have economic intercourse around the world. There's a lot. Look, when America goes alone, when America is first, it's America alone. And
when America goes first, America goes alone. You can't have that good old economic intercourse when it's by itself. That gives you an idea of the stuff that Joe Biden was saying. Now, you need to cover this, right? You can't have these clips floating out there where you're looking all miserable, and you certainly can't have clips out there where you are basically being alleged to have abused someone. So, who do they bring out in order to cover this level of abuse, in order to suck up the air out the room, in order to hide this story just for a little bit longer? Biden gets an endorsement. One, Hillary Clinton. And to make this how comical this is, in the same way that Joe Biden said economic intercourse in the other one, Joe Biden fell asleep on camera during the live stream during this endorsement. Let's hear the clip with Clinton endorsing Biden and Biden falling asleep during Clinton making that endorsement.
So I've been not only a colleague of Joe Biden's, I've been a friend. And I can tell you that I wish he were president right now, but I can't wait until he is, if all of us do our part to support the kind of person that we want back in the White House, to end the kind of disregard of not only American values, but American institutions, the rule of law, and so much else that is at stake because of the current occupant. So I'm thrilled to be here with Joe from my home and his home during the very crazy, scary times that we find ourselves in, to support his candidacy and to talk about this really significant issue about women during this time of COVID-19.
Now, why is Clinton talking about women? The reason that Clinton is talking about women is because they are at a women's virtual town hall. That's basically what's taking place. And at this women's virtual town hall, Hillary Clinton gave her endorsement for Joe Biden. And again, Joe Biden falls asleep in the middle of this endorsement, wakes up in somewhat of a huff, stretches and shakes and everything else while Clinton is making this particular endorsement. What you need to realize, though, is think about what's taking place here. Joe Biden has been accused of sexual assault, a violent sexual assault. The woman who accused Joe Biden of sexual assault has cooperating evidence for various people who were around her at the time, not to mention the call from the grave into Larry King's show. Biden has a women's virtual town hall. And in that women's virtual town hall, one of the top women in the Democratic Party endorses Joe Biden. What they don't mention in that women's town hall is that Joe Biden is being accused of sexual assault. Understand what's taking place here. While this candidate is being credibly accused of sexual assault, and why the Democratic Party is either downplaying it, calling her a Russian plant, or just not answering anything about the questions at all. This is a party that went whole hog for one against one Brett Kavanaugh, who said we believe Ford implicitly, hands to the roof. But in this very specific case, not only are they trying to ignore and bury this story, they're trying to do so by using Clinton, a person who supposedly have stood up for women all of these years, in order to cover Biden politically. Nancy Pelosi did the exact same thing a few days ago when she came out to endorse Biden. These endorsements aren't random. The fact that these are women aren't random. The fact that these are the top echelon of females in the Democratic Party is not random. All of this is to cover Joe Biden. All of this is to hide and bury these claims. That's the beginning and end of all of these endorsements. Yes, Clinton was going to endorse Biden anyway, but I'm making the point that the timing of this endorsement is not random. The timing of this is entirely politically opportunistic. How gross is this? Not only are you going to disavow what she's saying, but you go further into this notion and trying to hide it. Let's hear Stacey Abrams, who's throwing her hat into the ring for the Democratic Party. And I want you to see the problems that come along with the moment that you are affiliating yourself with Joe Biden for the vice presidency position, especially if you're a woman. Because basically, if you're going to say, I implicitly believe women, and you have a situation where Joe Biden says you should implicitly believe women, and that same Joe Biden who says implicitly believe women is accused of sexual assault, then you, as a female, what are you to do in this particular situation? What's the rational and logical only option that you have if you're trying to become vice president to Joe Biden? Let's hear Stacey Abrams.
I believe that women deserve to be heard, and I believe that they need to be listened to. But I also believe that those allegations have to be investigated by credible sources. The New York Times did a deep investigation, and they found that the accusation was not credible. I believe Joe Biden. I believe that he is a person who has demonstrated that his love of family, his love of our community has been made perfectly clear through his work as a congressional leader and as an American leader. I know Joe Biden, and I think that he is telling the truth and that this did not happen.
She knows Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been caught sniffing people's hair. Joe Biden has been caught in one uncomfortable situation after the next where the person felt uncomfortable. And in this very specific case, there is no reason, if you're going to believe Ford and if you're going to believe that Kavanaugh was somehow guilty, that Biden also gets a pass on this. All of this is politically opportunistic. That's what you must understand. And I'm making the point that it is utterly disgusting for them to take this hypocritical position of dinging one while entirely believing the other. Bob, political opportunism, right? Like, this is disgusting hypocrisy.
It was funny there. Did you hear Stacey Abrams almost say he loves women?
Yeah, he was right. She wanted to say he loves women. Right, I caught that.
She almost gave it away. Yeah, I mean, if you're not planning to be the VP and say that with a straight face so the Biden team can hear you say it out loud before they select you, I don't know what you're doing there. But how are you going to take a person's word about something that happened 36 years ago? And how's the New York Times the credible source that's investigating it? It's not the law enforcement. It's not, I don't know who it needs to be, but it's surely the New York Times shouldn't be seen as a credible source. They came out and reported everything that they found. They didn't find the Larry King tape that's come out. They didn't find this neighbor at a moments after the incident happened that Tara Reid told about it. I mean, so how did the New York Times miss stuff, but then they're using it as the credible source? The other big wrinkle here, Jamar, and I don't know if we've talked about it much on the show, but are the Senate records by Joe Biden. There are in storage at the University of Delaware about 1,800 boxes of photographs, documents, videotapes, and files that went into storage in 2012. And that's what Tara Reid is now calling to be released. Initially, those were supposed to be released 2 years after Joe Biden left office of the vice presidency in January of 2017. They did not get released in January of 2019. And in April of that year, the university came out and said, we're actually going to hold on to these until 2 years after Joe Biden leaves public office. And so there's no way, at least unless compelled to do so, that Joe Biden releases these papers. And if that looks how is this at that point any different than Donald Trump not releasing his tax returns?
Or Bloomberg.
It's again, it's a mystery. It's a box. It's closed off, and you can't get to it. For me, it's just the exact same show that Trump's putting on.
It's also Bloomberg and the NDAs. I mean, when Warren is like, hey, if you don't have anything to hide, show the NDA. If you don't have anything to hide, show the NDA. Isn't this the exact same situation? All right, Joe Biden, if you don't have anything to hide, tell them to release the files.
Yeah, and it doesn't look good. The more people that get involved, the more people that come forward. These are just more and more interviews on national television that are going to drag well into the fall. And again, I don't know if I agree with you on the timing of Hillary Clinton covering this up. I think an endorsement had to come, but you only got to do it once, and it's April. You still have 6 months to go. There's not 6 months worth of Hillary Clinton footage. I'll also note, I wish our viewers, if you did see Biden, if you didn't see Biden dozing off during Hillary Clinton's endorsement,
Hilarious.
I don't know what else he did that. Why are you not just like resting all day for like the one big event you have? But in that moment there, you again see, and it really shows the cognitive difference between a Bernie Sanders and a Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, for whatever you think about her, is still incredibly sharp. I mean, she's still very capable of giving that speech in that moment, and she showed that she was able to do that yesterday. But then here is Joe Biden falling asleep, and it makes you wonder, again, is he going to make it to the nomination to November? And if he doesn't, I feel like, and I hate to say this, Jamar, that Hillary Clinton seems like the most logical person to replace him.
Really? You think they're going to put Clinton in?
Who else at this point? Who else has the name recognition? Who else has already beat Trump? I think that would obviously be the line they used.
She lost to Trump.
I don't know who else they replace. It would have to be either Sanders or Clinton. And I could tell you right now, if the Democratic Party had a pick,
there's no
they're
way.
not going to pick.
Yeah, they're not going to pick Sanders on this. I don't know. I mean, can you honestly see them ripping Joe Biden out of that? And what does that look like if they do? Because I agree with the caller from yesterday, where he made the point that part of the reason that they were trying to get rid of Sanders is because if they do put somebody else in, they don't want Sanders to be, raising his hand. Do you think they would do that? How would that look, them ripping Biden out of that?
I think for it to happen, Biden either needs to pass away, and I'm not saying I hope he does, but I'm just saying he'll either die or these allegations will just get to a point where he has no choice but to leave, the Senate papers come out, or somebody else comes forward with testimony that there's no other way for him to stay in office. But we have 6 months to find out if he'll make it to November. But for right now, Jamal, we do need to take our first break of the hour. In the first hour, we'll be talking about the Ohio primary, Andrew Yang suing New York over the cancellation of their presidential primary, and members of Bernie Sanders' campaign team setting up a PAC to support Joe Biden. Yeah. That, and we I can't even say the word. We'll have our new game called What They Didn't Wear Best, the debut here on Political Misfits, Jamal Thomas. And if that's not enough, don't worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune in to Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory, or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. Guys, your engagement is always appreciated, so feel free to tweet, chat, or phone us at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. Also, if you're digging what we're putting down, definitely give up the like and the share. It helps with our visibility and with our growth. So joining us to cover several stories in our domestic politics, we have host of the Discourse podcast, Brandon Sutton. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
Absolutely, man. So let's start here. Andrew Yang sues the Democratic Party. Now, this warmed my heart, even though I don't necessarily know where this is going to go. So let me explain the story. Sanders was apoplectic when they got rid of him in the Democratic primary, in the New York primary. Yang was apoplectic, but Yang decided to actually sue them. Yang basically opened up a lawsuit arguing that canceling the election will suppress the turnout, as voters will have less incentive, meaning turnout down ballot, as they will have less incentive to cast their votes when they can't cast their votes for the highest office of the land. He also argued that removing or canceling the Democratic Party denies voters due process and denies voters the right to vote, and therefore must be invalidated, removing the authority for the defendant to take the actions complained of therein. It's legal language, but basically he's just saying, look, by not allowing people to vote, you're undercutting their democratic rights and you're hurting down ballot voting because people tend to go out and vote in higher numbers when they're voting for the presidency of the United States. Brandon, do you think this is going to work? I mean, I don't typically. I mean, the last time around when Tom Perez was sued, or when the DNC was sued, they basically made the argument in court that we can cheat, we can pick a candidate in the smoke-filled room, we can lie, we can do any of that. We're a corporation. We're not beholden to you all, even though you guys are giving us money. Is this something similar where the party, and intrinsic to the party, they can do nearly whatever that they want, and that the law, in this case, doesn't necessarily entirely, or is not entirely able to intrude?
I mean, I think that even if that's the case, which it has been ruled, like as you mentioned, 2016, they were sued regarding the quote-unquote rigging of the 2016 primary. Even if it is legally the case, right? Even if it's legally the case that they can do whatever they want, that they can pick a candidate in a smoke-filled back room. From a moral standpoint, it's obviously the wrong thing to do because from the, they are a corporation, but I would argue that they comport themselves and in the minds of their voters and people who believe in them, quote unquote, they are, a political, a party, which in their, I would argue their heads is like a institution that is, again, beholden to the pursuit of democracy above all else, not the pursuit of their shareholders, not the pursuit of profit, not the pursuit of, things that would normally be attributed to like a typical corporation.
But Brandon, you don't believe that, do you? I mean, they're not responsible to their shareholders. They're responsible to their political interests, their ideologies. I mean, I agree with you that under normal circumstances, we have these various symbols that all of us kind of organize around. So you have like the Constitution, you get 320 million people to kind of organize around this body of law or whatnot. So fair enough. And then you get that at a lesser level when you get into the standpoint of the parties. However, what has the Democratic Party done over the last, let's say, 40, 50 years that gave you the impression that they were working in the interests of the people, of their constituents, as opposed to the people who may be donating cash to them or where they can get some kind of favors from?
Oh, no, I'm not speaking from my perspective.
Oh, fair enough. I'm sorry.
Everyone
fair enough.
Know that what the Democratic Party is about. At best, they are not even a party. They are just a Ponzi scheme. That would, whose goal is to keep the appearance that they are a legitimate political party with the, goal of legislating towards a, quote unquote, more socially egalitarian society, whatever that means to like their big tent base. So my point wasn't that whether they could legally do it, right? Because I think that, what is legally allowed is more of an issue of power than it is an issue of like what's on the books. And I think the Democratic Party has a lot of power. My point was that from the appearance level, with a judge might say they're fine to do this, like they're not beholden to any rules of what they decide to play by. Like the people who are just engaging with them at the surface level, at the cultural level, at the, I'm a Democrat, vote blue no matter who level. For some of them, like this argument is going to like have traction in their head.
Yeah.
It's like it's going to cause of schism between the Democratic Party's voters, like their rank and file liberals, and the people who at the top simply want to run the party, but as a way to funnel money to a few key seats and a few key people and enrich a bunch of billionaires. So my point was like, it may not work in terms of like legally them being required to hold it, but it may work to wake up a lot of people who otherwise would not be hit. The Democratic Party's true goals are, right? I mean, it's incredibly suspicious that they would cancel the New York primary, a state that had a lot of Bernie Sanders support. We've seen the rallies there. Around the same time that information regarding Biden's sexual assault is becoming more and more prominent. It's becoming better corroborated. So like it does seem as though the fix is in there, and the goal is to even further depress the turnout of progressives and the interest of progressives in the Democratic Party. Like they're just trying to sneak Biden past the post.
Well, I agree with you on that. I think that's fascinating, right? But what effect do you think this is going to have in regards to the general election? Because I've seen people who basically, Peter Dow, I don't know if you know who Peter Dow is. Peter Dow was a guy who was a Hillary person back in 2016. I don't entirely believe Dow's come to Jesus moment. By the same token, over the past 3 or 4 years, Dow has been pretty heavily pushing this kind of lefty agenda stuff. Dow has made the point of saying, I'm done with the Democratic Party. I can't abide by them pushing this guy like this. And they think that this is acceptable. What do you think the consequence of this between pushing Biden and between nixing these primary processes where people actually do want to go and vote?
Well, I think the consequence of it is depressed voter turnout in terms of the Democratic Party. But that's something I would argue is depressed voter turnout in the general election when it comes to Biden versus Trump. I would argue is a secondary, if tertiary goal to the Democratic Party strategy moving forward. I think their goal, especially in New York, is to secure the seats of a few, Cuomo-friendly, center-left, center-right, blue dog Democrat, IDC types in New York City, and prevent a surge of Bernie Sanders voters from coming out and ousting them as well. So again, I think we're looking, maybe too far into the future of the general election here, and not realizing that the Democratic Party still has battles to win over progressives in their own party in this primary season. And keeping Bernie Sanders' support low going into convention, keeping his delegate count low going into convention, keeping Bernie Sanders or left adjacent or left politicians out of New York City government is also an important thing they're trying to do. So, it's a multifaceted plan, but none of them are focused on beating Trump.
Right there. That's the important part. Because if people don't realize that, they will look at this election and be like, this doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense if you realize that Sanders would take the party for a generation as opposed to Trump might be winning for 4 years. Bob, I'm curious. You have to deal with organizing, meaning you have to come up and make up the deficiencies of the political space. How do you see this? Do you think that they're going to be punished for this, either from nixing the primaries and the way people feel about Sanders and wanting to make that vote, or even the harassment claims from the standpoint of Tara Reade and this kind of downplaying it and ignoring it? Just because Democrats downplay that stuff and ignore it doesn't mean the rest of the population is.
Yeah, they still obviously have to hold their primaries for the congressional races there in New York. And as to Brandon's point, to not have the progressive, to not have people mobilized or energized within the Democratic Party is a win for the Andrew Cuomos and the status quo. For me, I think it just continues to show the Democratic Party for what it's worth. And again, to reiterate the quote from Maya Angelou, once they tell you who they are the first time, believe them. This is a party that does not care about widespread democracy. It's not a party that cares about people. And I've been harping this for last several years, especially if you look at what's happening in America's largest cities. Bill de Blasio, as much as people may give him a pass for endorsing Bernie Sanders, not a great mayor for progressives and for people on the ground in that city. You have Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta. You have Lori Lightfoot now in Chicago, Muriel Bowser here in Washington, D.C., London Breed in San Francisco, Garcetti in L.A. These are all neoliberal Democrats who all believe in privatizing land, privatizing the development of those cities. And when you privatize and give more public money to private corporations, the less space and room there are for individuals and small businesses. And so you're really seeing them collapse under their own weight. And we talk so often, and this will be really interesting, Brandon, coming into November, is what happens with the economy. It's almost in a weird, bizarre situation where Democrats will kind of have the same playbook that they had in 2007, running against McCain and saying, look, the Republican Party, George W. Bush, have absolutely failed the economy. It's collapsing. You need to put in a Democrat. And they'll need to use the same argument, whether or not people believe them and recognize that the Obama administration did very little to uphold the lowest income levels in America and help close some of those economic gaps. They're not doing that. And so, again, the Democratic Party is having to sell us something. And this time it's a hell of a lot less shiny than Barack Obama was, but sell us the same rhetoric that hasn't turned well for people in the past, and they're doing more of these actions. Yeah, I guess they're just looking for voter suppression, a low turnout, and just hope that Trump's hated so much they can somehow win.
I don't think the Democratic Party is really trying to sell us anything very hard. It feels like the enthusiasm for Biden, at least amongst the people whose job it is or whose role it is, either explicit or implicit. I'm thinking of Democratic aligned media, op-eds, et cetera. But the goal to sell us Biden is being taken even less seriously than the goal of selling us Hillary Clinton. Biden's platform in many ways is worse than Hillary Clinton's platform is. Biden in many ways is the worst aspect of the Democratic Party over the past 30 years in one candidate. And so they're looping in the Tara Reade allegations, and they're increasing coverage now, and a lot of people's willingness to ignore it until this point. I think that all come part of the same conversation. People are trying to preserve as much of their own integrity while also preserving their allegiance to power in this little game that they have to do. It's a lot of people who otherwise were so in doubt about Tara Reade days ago are now pretending as though some random evidentiary burden has been met, and that's why they're coming out and talking about it now. Really, it was a balancing act. It was okay, my brand is this Democratic Party, largely speaking, or just a media liberal brand, is leaving women, pro-women, Me Too, Time's Up, the Women's March. And or my brand is informing people what's going on, whether it be the Obama administration losing 1,000 seats during their tenure as president, or the economic collapse that was never really combated by the Obama administration, really. So I think that the media, the people who are trying to sell us, and who are trying to sell us, are having a harder time balancing their own image and self-image with the lofty goal of pretending that Joe Biden is anything other than a nightmare.
I'm curious, Brandon, why? I mean, if you think about, like right now, you have Nancy Pelosi who has the House, and she could put out whatever legislation she wants, whether the Republicans accept it or not. She can do it. I mean, because you're making a good point. During the time when Obama administration was in and you had the financial collapse, Obama let homeowners go bust while at the same token doing everything in his power to protect Wall Street. And you have another situation where even though Democrats aren't in power from the standpoint of the presidency, they do have the House and they can pass legislation in order to contest and contend to be somewhat of a rightful opposition for whatever the Republican Party is. They're not doing that. Why? Why are they this feckless and exorbitantly weak in regards to doing things to try to ameliorate the difficult problems of our time? I mean, the report just came out. I think it was like a 4% or 4 to 6% slowdown in the economy. We were talking about like 26 million people out of a job, 10 million people without health care. All of these people, for the most part, are desperate. Like, why are they this worthless?
I mean, honestly, I think that's judging them by the standards by which we would consider a legitimate governing political party to be valuable. I don't think that Nancy Pelosi is worthless to Nancy Pelosi's prominent stakeholders, to Nancy Pelosi's own bottom line, to Nancy Pelosi, to the Democratic Party's fundraising goals of making sure they have enough money to keep Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein in the seats that they have. I think that she's worthless to the goal of moving forward less progressive legislation aimed at expanding the Social Security, on suspending Social Security, aimed on expanding Medicaid, aimed on targeting or making the argument for the Democratic Party on the traditional means that they usually did, which was that, hey, you know what? The Republican Party believes in choice and freedom and all other nonsense, but we believe in, expanding and raising the bottom floor for all Americans through comprehensive social legislation. They don't do that anymore. Yeah. They don't really do that. That's not what they're about. They're about, I think, largely speaking, meaningless symbolic gestures, the adoption of social justice language, the adoption of various tokens to perform the job of espousing the values of neoliberalism as a multiracial, multigender project, I suppose. But and that's why, going back to the point about Joe Biden, I think that's why Joe Biden creates such a unique challenge for I think that's why Joe Biden creates a unique challenge for all but the most Democratic Party's most virulently entrenched followers who will just take whatever they can get, because there is a layer around that, like that core of Democratic voters that do believe that, hey, you know what, I don't understand institutional violence, I don't understand hegemony, I don't understand the prison industrial complex, I don't understand that violence is violence, even if it is laundered through procedure or legislation or law or whatever. But for those people, I would argue Me Too was a big deal. Me Too was a big part of Democratic Party's brand post 2016. Like the Violence Against Women Act, that was a big part of selling Joe Biden, actually. So frankly, I think that where the previous aspects of Democratic Party's failures were hard to sell or hard to communicate, or easy to ignore when trying to sell previous candidates, even trying to sell their neoliberal candidates. Joe Biden's badness on every level, from the structural to the interpersonal, makes him a uniquely hard grift to keep the Democratic Party going. And so I think they're very much relying on the fear of Donald Trump this time. It's like that was the message of 2016. That message has become stronger. It was basically, well, you know what? Are you afraid enough now?
Yeah. Speaking of entrenched, let's do a quick question on Ohio. So people may be forgiven for not necessarily knowing this took place, but there was actually an election that took place yesterday in Ohio. I think I called it a whisper in the monologue because for the most part, it went by almost without acknowledgement. Biden, speaking about people who are entrenched, this election was supposed to take place on the 17th. It was postponed to the 28th due to fears of people being unduly infected with COVID-19. Biden has another dominant win, 72.4% of the vote share compared to 16.6% of Sanders. This would net Biden with 96 additional delegates and Sanders with 4. Now, there's a caveat. Because Sanders suspended his campaign, Biden started this off with 47 delegates before anybody even knew what the vote total was. Basically, in suspending his campaign, Sanders, or the number of delegates Sanders could get, were just reduced from scratch. Bob, does that mean Sanders needs to restart this campaign in order to get back in there? Or basically just kind of accept where he's at and just leave it alone and let Biden just kind of run with it?
I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry. He's just got to be done. We got to be done with Bernie Sanders. He's done. His team's done. He's done. He's made it clear he's not going to jump back in. And honestly, I think as much as the left is going to try to pressure Joe Biden, they obviously absolutely have to do whatever they can to try to put pressure on him into the convention. Yeah. I really think that there needs to be an economic populist movement that comes out of this moment more than anything. And so I would be looking past November at this point and thinking about how people on the left are going to orient themselves. We saw the Occupy Wall Street movement take hold after Obama was in office for a few years. And I really think that other movements need to take hold. It just electoral movements are places where movements go to die. And if you're trying to re-engage or re-energize people, getting into the Democratic primary at this point, I don't think it's going to do much for others, and they should look elsewhere. And maybe Jamal, and you could tell us about the next story, if his team was still banded together around him, and even if there was a chance to do it, maybe they could. But it seems like the Sanders team has quickly split ways and taken off on their different paths.
Oh, that's an understatement. That's an understatement. So the New York Times is reporting that Jeff Weaver, Sanders' campaign manager of 2016 and top advisor in 2020, is leading an effort to form a super PAC in order to con lefties, Hispanics, and blue-collar progressives to vote for one Joe Biden. Other top Sanders people from the campaign include Chuck Rocha, a senior advisor who focused on Latina outreach, Tim Tagris, digital strategy and fundraising, and Sheila Jackson, the California strategist. Mark Longabaugh, who worked for Sanders in 2016, will also be taking part in this venture. Now, just to be clear, Sanders has nothing to do with this. The email list is not going to go to these guys, nor is the money that Sanders raised for the campaign, nearly $250 million. None of that will be going to this group. But Brandon, this is bad politics, right? I mean, basically, they're going to try to make an argument that, look, you need to vote for Joe Biden if you're a black, Hispanic, or a lefty. And they're going to have to come up with some reason to justify voting for one Joe Biden. What on earth are they going to tell these people to try to get them to place that vote or pull that lever for one Joe Biden? And by the way, do you consider this a betrayal? I consider this a betrayal. Do you consider this somewhat of a betrayal?
I mean, I don't know if I consider it betrayal because they weren't working for me personally. I consider this to indictment of the Bernie Sanders campaign, that they would have people like this in those positions. Right? I think Jeff Weaver just demonstrated that he was not for the job in 2016, that whatever his allegiances were or his goals were, that they were not sincere, not either, rather, whatever his allegiances were, whatever his skills and abilities were, they were not suitable for getting Bernie Sanders over the 2020 or 2016 threshold and getting him into that convention. And now, again, what are they going to say about how people should vote for Joe Biden? He's better than Trump within his platform. If any of this stuff gets done, oh, that's good. Based on our history, can you believe that we'll get most of this stuff done? No, probably not. Of course not. But if you don't have hope that we'll do something, then you're just basically giving in to the nihilism that is the two-party system is broken, which it's true. So, I mean, I think that I see coming from most people is that he's better than Trump, and that's deniable, and that it's a platform of things that people would generally like, but the Democratic Party's not really committed to them through. Right. And then we go to the argument that, well, you can vote for Joe Biden, hold him accountable afterwards, but we don't have a system that allows for that. That's right. Especially when people are just deeply afraid of accountability for Trump or the potentiality of a Trump-like figure coming into power again. Accountability just can simply never exist. I think to go back to the other question about that you asked previously that I didn't really get a chance to answer about Bernie Sanders and why he didn't sue and why Joe Biden and why Andrew Yang is. I would say because Bernie Sanders is very, very committed to the legitimacy of the Democratic Party and of the American media very committed to what I would argue is the productive and definitely anti-revolutionary act of preventing people from waking up to the truth about the Democratic Party and about the media, which is that they are filling you with false narratives and that they are not actively trying to make things better for you in any real way. They're not even trying to stop all of the bleeding. They're just trying to. They're just more concerned with how their grift and enrich their donors without necessarily making it obvious that they're doing it. So I think that Bernie Sanders is just very, very vested in preventing people from waking up to what is the truth, despite I would argue speaking well to it, at least at certain points in his campaign.
So Bob, so maybe there needs to be somebody else in the political space. What about Justin Amash? Can you tell us a little bit about Amash? Because apparently he's running for the Libertarian candidate.
Yeah, sure. Brandon Sutton can chime in there, taking down the two-party system. Congressman Justin Amash, a Republican turned independent from Michigan, announced Tuesday night that he is launching an exploratory committee for a long-shot presidential bid as a Libertarian. This had long been rumored, but now he is exploring. Amash said, quote, "Americans are ready for practical approaches based in humility and trust of the people. We're ready for a presidency that will restore respect of our Constitution and bring people together. I'm excited and honored to be taking these first steps towards serving Americans of every background as president." Amash will need to win the Libertarian Party's nomination at their convention in Austin, Texas, which is currently set for the end of May. In an op-ed regarding leaving the grand old party, Amash said, "The Republican Party, I believe, stood for limited government, economic freedom, and individual liberty, principles that made the American dream possible for my family. In recent years, though, I've become disenchanted with party politics and frightened by what I see from it. The two-party system has evolved into existential threat to American principles and institutions." Two big questions come from this announcement. First, will America clear space for a third-party candidacy? The Libertarian Party, for being a small party, did grow its numbers in 2016, despite, Gary, what is Aleppo Johnson's multiple gaffes along the way. It should be noted Amash is a son of a Syrian immigrant, so the chances of him Aleppoing are low. The second big question, Brandon, is who does Amash hurt in the polls if he runs? Democrats or Republicans? A poll conducted, now this was about a year ago, so don't hold too much truth from it, but a poll from last year by Detroit News, for instance, showed that Biden led Trump in Michigan by 12 points in a head-to-head race, 53-41. But adding Amash to the equation reduced Biden's margin by half, with Biden leading 45-39 and Amash pulling a significant 10%. Amash also drew 16% of independent voters in that poll, reducing Biden's 13-point lead among them to a tie with Trump. Brandon, do you see any chance of Amash or the Libertarian Party having a strong showing here in 2020? They polled about, I think it was roughly about 3% in 2016, enough to throw a wrench into it, therefore the Democrats and Republicans, especially when these elections are coming down to fractions of points, as we did see there in Michigan. What do you make of his run?
I mean, I don't know at this point. I obviously believe that the two-party system is broken, as you mentioned before, and I believe that, it's incumbent upon us to start building power outside the Democratic Party, both at the local level and at the national level. It's only for, a sense of cohesion along those lines. But I'm not really big into stunts. This is a stunt, right? If you want to run third-party campaign, even in 2020, I won't judge you because I think that, the two-party system is anti-democratic. But, when it comes to stuff like this, it's then you're not really trying to win. I would argue he might just be trying to sabotage Trump, like you mentioned. Because I think that is a key or a real strategy that at least a Republican or a principled conservative might try to do. None of them have stepped up to this point to do it, but Justin Amash is the guy. I think he'll be enough to the favor, rather to turn the tide away from Trump towards Joe Biden. I don't know, because Republican Party, at least conservatives, tend to circle rank a lot when a lot better than I would say a Democratic Party does. And so towards the end, I think interest in third parties is up generally. But I think once we get closer and closer to November, we'll have a better gauge of how likely anyone is to vote third party, or how likely anyone is, or rather how likely any third party candidate is to actually affect the election versus how high the stakes have gotten at that point. It sounds silly, but we're in a very unprecedented time. And so I think predictions here are going to be more often than not wrong rather than, right.
Yeah, throw me in some Jesse Ventura on that Green Party ticket, and we're ready to dance, Brandon Sutton. Let's hope he gets in. We'll talk about him much more if he actually jumps in and fully commits. A young guy there, 40 years old, a Congress member from Michigan looking to run. We got one more story here with Brandon Sutton. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We continue with Brandon Sutton, the host of the Discourse podcast. I want to debut a new game we're playing here on Political Misfits, Brandon. It's called What They Didn't Wear Best, a classic twist to many of the red carpet showings of who they are wearing. In our new game, we take a look at what people weren't wearing and discuss whether or not it was a good look. So first, we start with ABC News reporter Will Reeve. Reeve appeared Tuesday on Good Morning America for a segment about pharmacies using drones to deliver prescriptions to patients. But at one point, Reeve, who was acting as his own cameraman as he broadcast from home, was positioned so it was quite clear he was dressed in a suit jacket, but no pants. Brian, what do you think here? Good move, bold move, wrong move for Reeve to not have on pants while on national television?
I mean, frankly, from my perspective, like the number of people who don't wear pants on television is incredibly high. It just so happened he didn't aspect ratio. It can happen to the best of us. I mean, anyone who's in him is I think being self-righteous. You know, like you can't always know where the bottom of the camera. And he should have been at a desk, though. I think that's the real lesson here.
Be at a desk at home. Jamal, I have not done the show without pants. I'm not going to ask you to disclose whether or not you are wearing pants right now. But
I am, Bob. The majority of the times I am.
Wearing pants?
Yes, majority of the time.
Well,
every so often.
You didn't say all of the time. Jamal, let me ask you about our second contestant. The second contestant here is not quite the anchor themselves, but the person in the background of an interview. Spanish reporter Alfonso Merlos was speaking as a guest on journalist Javier Negre's State of Alarm YouTube channel last Friday when a semi-naked woman casually sauntered into the background of the frame. It turned out that it was not Merlos' longtime girlfriend, former Big Brother contestant Marta Lopez, but Alexa Rivas, a reporter with Spanish TV show Socialite. The scandal was dubbed Merlos Place, referencing Melrose Place, the American soap opera. Jamal, got to put some clothes on your mistresses if they're going to be hanging around the house while you're doing interviews.
I saw that video. That video was so funny. That video was hilarious because she was just kind of like walking around in the background.
Chilling,
and the very first question is like, is that his girlfriend or is that his wife? And immediately when the answer is no, oh man, you're off to the races, right? Yeah, you got to put clothes on or at the very least not end up in a camera shot, you know, if your man is already with
I just feel like Brandon, if you're going to do an interview and you have other people in your home and it's a small home, it's an apartment, why wouldn't you just say, hey, just a heads up, I'm about to do this interview. Don't walk in my shot or interrupt me because I'll be on an interview.
Don't forget. I mean, look, again, we're all in such a time right now. It's hard to get into the mindset that you're working when you're from home. I mean, it's easier than, you know, for those of us who do, I think, more independent work from home. It's easier to like sort of switch that switch in your head. You know, I mean, I don't want to, you know, dive. I'm wearing pants now. Is that the like? No, of course not. But you know, in this case, you know, like it is what it is. I'm not willing to cast doubt or aspersions or judge anyone about their state of dress in their own home. You know, you're being invited into people's homes, so you know you got to expect to see a little, you know,
all right, skin. Fair enough. I just want to note on that story.
That's
Merlos
way too fair.
Lopez.
That's way too fair, Bob. That's way too fair.
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it because our last contestant, I just want to say, closing that story out, Merlos and Lopez are going through a very public breakup, as you could imagine now. But our last and third contestant in our game here, not in their home, did not forget because they were reminded several times. Our third contestant here, Brandon Sutton, the one and only VP Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, on Tuesday toured the Mayo Clinic without wearing a mask, despite the renowned medical facility telling him that masks are required for visitors and everyone else there to slow the spread of the coronavirus. At one point during his visit to the Mayo Clinic, Pence is shown standing around 10 people, including a patient, all wearing masks, unlike him. Do we give him a pass or not, Brandon Sutton?
Of course, I don't give Mike Pence a pass for anything. I mean, at that point, though, it does seem as though, like, he's more likely to expose himself to coronavirus than he is to get exposed. I mean, he is to expose people in the hospital with. But, that's sort of that doesn't make it better. It just makes it, more irresponsible of anything. So I would say, what's a suitable punishment for this? I don't know, but you don't want to be called a vector for disease, is how I'm going to put that. You don't want to be accurately tracked as like a way that disease. You don't want to put up on a CDC fucking board, right? A CDC like little thumbtack board.
Jamal, what did you make of it there? Not wearing a mask, good look or bad look for Mike Pence?
That's a bad look. I mean, look, Mike Pence probably doesn't care, of course, but there is something to be said either for catching the infection yourself or passing the infection. I mean, there was a hypothesis that Trump might have been infected. Bolsonaro was potentially infected. Boris Johnson was potentially infected. And these guys have been interacting with one another. It's just a modicum of respect to ensure that if you're in a hospital and people are already ill, that you don't necessarily want to pass on something. And it's an easy thing to do in order to prevent it. I mean, even if it's considered a token gesture because Pence doesn't believe he's ill or whatever, you still have some degree of a responsibility to do due diligence if you're going to do something like that. As somebody who's been in the hospital for long periods of time and in intensive care where everyone was forced to wear a mask or wear a gown or something to that effect, it just comes in territory with the hospital. I mean, it just seems like something you would do just as a rational person. So yeah, it's all
right. So I think we have it there. Mike Pence, the winner of what he should have been wearing there in our what they didn't wear best. Congratulations, Mike Pence. Also, Donald Trump not wearing his mask quite often there in his television statements. With that, though, we are out of time with Brandon Sutton, the host of the Discourse podcast. Brandon, thank you for your time. Where can people find more of you and your work online?
You can find me over on Twitter at Pretty Bad Lefty, and you can find me on my podcast, The Discourse, on all major podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud. Thanks, guys, for having me. I am wearing a mask this entire time, so I don't want to transmit any germs over there.
You got a mask on and pants on. It's greatly appreciated. That was Brandon Sutton, the host of the Discourse podcast. We turn now to a minute break before coming back with Meat and Murder here in the United States. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We close out our first hour 1 of 2, with Donald Trump's signing of an executive order yesterday under the Defense Production Act declaring meat processing plants critical infrastructure. Yes, Donald Trump can address meat in America, but not ventilator shortages. Trump's assured reporters there's no problem with the supply of meat, just that it had hit a, quote, legal roadblock. That roadblock seems to be the potential to be sued for forcing workers to ensure unsafe conditions. And the order offers these huge companies liability protections in case they do make their workers sick through the lack of equipment or other safety preconditions. So who's liable? It sounds like Donald Trump saying the U.S. government will be. Of course, it's not framed that way. Speaking about the order, Trump said closures of meat processing plants, quote, threaten the continued functioning of the national meat and poultry supply chain, undermining critical infrastructure during the national emergency. Given the high volume of meat and poultry processed by many facilities, any unnecessary closures can quickly have a large effect on the food supply chain. It feels like unnecessary is doing a lot of work here. What do huge corporations always find more necessary? Maintaining profits or protecting workers? There's a reason these plants are so crowded and dangerous. Cost-cutting measures, of course. The treatment of human beings in some of these huge plants isn't a whole lot better than their treatment of the animals they process. Many workers weren't pleased, to say the least. The United Food and Commercial Workers International Union said Tuesday that 20 food processing and meatpacking union workers in the U.S. have died of the virus, and roughly 6,500 are sick or have been exposed while working near some who have tested positive. And the president of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, said Trump's decision was wrong and immoral. Quote, thousands of essential workers in meat processing plants are sick with COVID-19, and many have died because of the Trump administration and the governors and health officials where these plants are located who fail to protect them despite many calls for help. He said there, the president of LULAC, we've spoken to CEOs and union leaders to get voluntary testing for all workers, but that still hasn't occurred. LULAC, League of United League Citizens, is calling on Americans to observe meatless May Mondays next month to highlight the need to protect workers. The president of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union said, quote, we only wish that this administration cared as much about the lives of working people as it does about meat, pork, and poultry products. When poultry plants shut down, it's for a deep cleaning and to save workers' lives. If the administration had developed meaningful safety requirements early on, as they should have and still must do, they would not even have become an issue. President of UFCW Local 7, which represents 3,000 workers at the meat processing plant in Colorado, said the order will, quote, only ensure that more workers get sick, jeopardizing lives, families' income, communities, and, of course, the country's food supply chain. More than 100 meatpackers walked off the job in Minnesota Monday night to protest working conditions, and 50 more did the same in Nebraska on Tuesday after Trump announced his order. Dozens of plants have closed due to strikes and outbreaks. Jamal, for me, this kind of reminds me, I don't know if it's a analogous or not, but what happened with the first responders there in New York that were given some support post 9/11 for health conditions, but then the U.S. Congress and government basically tried to cut them off. And we're going to see the exact same thing here. Sure, we'll cover you with COVID-19 symptoms right now in medical treatment, but long term, yet again, we're going to see workers completely decimated despite fulfilling, I guess, what are essential work jobs. I don't think it's essential to eat meat. I don't think obviously I live without eating meat, Jamal. But again, it just seems like we're setting up workers to fail in the long run.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I mean, and not just setting workers up to fail, because we're setting them up to fail as is. Like right now, you have 26 million people, most likely at the next job report, it's probably going to be 30 million at that point, if not more. You're going to have more people without healthcare insurance. And this is in the middle of a pandemic. And it's not like the government is taking rational action from the perspective of the population itself. They're doing the opposite of that. They're leaving that population extremely vulnerable, both sides of Congress. I said it before, I honestly believe that the owner class that basically pays and buys the Democratic and Republican Party want those people back to work as soon as possible because they want to get their profits. And like I said, they're not the people who are going to be, Bezos is not going to be working 8 hours or 10 hours a day at those Amazon stores, dragging products from point A to point B. It's going to be us. Donald Trump, right now, doing this policy. Also, at the exact same time, piglets aborted, chickens gassed as pandemic slams the meat sector. So one story is that Donald Trump is going to force people to go to work in the meat sector in order to keep that industry going, while simultaneously you have chickens that are being gassed and piglets being aborted. How weird is that?
Yeah, and then you just have huge PR pushes by people like Tyson Foods basically saying the supply chain's breaking, you're not going to be able to eat. It's like you're not going to be able to eat their profits. Their profits are going to eat it. You're not going to be able to eat their products, and that's all they're saying. The rest of the supply chain is just thrown out of whack because restaurants are closed, but there are plenty of food. The timing of this pandemic, honestly, for the United States could not have been better given the need to get food to people as a growing season begins right now for folks. So I think the food supply chain is fine. It's just a matter of getting these big corporations and the federal government out of the way. Jamal, with that, we are out of time in our first hour. But don't you worry, Political Misfits. We're back with another hour of live radio after this. In the second hour, we're talking about the rise of the surveillance state in the time of COVID-19. Democrats' attempts to save the economy in a presidential year and whether or not Biden foreign policy towards Latin America would look any different from Donald Trump's. That and more. You listen to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber here, kind of, sort of, with Jamarl Thomas. We continue to bring you live programming daily from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Big shout out to our engineers there working in the studio to keep us live and connected to all of you. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. You can also shoot us a note on Twitter. We're at Sputnik Misfits, or if you're watching on the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel, shoot a comment on there and we'll get to those by the end of the hour. We have another hour here of going against the grain with you. We're talking about the rise of the surveillance state, the latest from Venezuela, and in our weekly revelation segment, we talk about the revelations you may have if you take psychedelic mushrooms. We start here, though, to talk about the rise of state and corporate spying in the time of COVID-19. Here to join us is Anna Parampil, independent journalist with The Gray Zone. Oh, Anya's not quite here with us. She dropped off, but we'll be back with her and much more shortly here. Jamal, let me tell you a little bit about the state of surveillance that has me absolutely terrified. And I was telling you earlier when we had talked on the show that it feels much like toll booths. Once they're up and start working, they never actually come down despite having collected the money for whatever public program that they were put up for in the first place. And so I see the same thing happening here when it comes to the surveillance state. Yesterday, we announced that Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser will tap former Bush administration official Michael Chertoff to be her top advisor, along with Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Chertoff, best known for his failure to adequately prepare or respond to Hurricane Katrina in 2005 while head of Homeland Security. Chertoff also co-authored the U.S. Patriot Act and is a big proponent of full body scanners. And this reliance on security technologies to help, quote unquote, reopen societies has also been on the rise across the United States. We are now seeing several states turn to thermal imaging cameras to scan for a rise in body temperatures, a common symptom of COVID-19. If someone carries a temperature higher than 100 degrees or higher than previous 10 people scan, that person would then be required for additional checks. Not exactly sure, Jamarl, how this works when you have a disease that's asymptomatic for so many people. So you may be able to stop some of the people with symptoms, but if they're asymptomatic, then what exactly does that mean for these thermal scanners? But they're going to use them nonetheless. Since the outbreak, companies like Flexible Systems, Thermal Guardian, CrowdRx, and many more have begun manufacturing the cameras for use in airports, healthcare centers, and even apartment buildings in New York, where the pandemic has hit particularly hard. A store in Georgia, City Farmers Market, has already set up thermal imaging cameras to scan customers as they enter the store. Chris Bainter, the director of global business development at FLIR Systems, told CBS News, quote, "What we're seeing is there will be a new normal that will involve thermal screening as a frontline tool. FLIR has been producing thermal imaging cameras since SARS epidemic in 2003, when it gained widespread use in Asia." So we got people here in the nation's capital pushing for full body scanners, and we have thermal body scans happening across the United States and in Asia. And the same trend of technologies has also been included, as we have reported here, the rise of facial scanning softwares that can identify people even if 50% of their face is covered by masks. So your COVID-19 mask will not prevent the state from monitoring you. We are joined by Anya Parampil, a journalist with The Gray Zone. Anya, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Anya, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the rise in the surveillance state here with COVID-19. It seems like states are going to rush to use whatever technology and surveillance tools they can use to be able to, under the guise of tracking and tracing COVID-19 patients. But for me, it just seems like another opportunity for the state to continue mass surveillance of the people.
Yeah, it just feels like the state is using the opportunity to expand its own powers as it always does in a crisis. What happened after 9/11 when it acted and really changed forever, I think, the way the individual citizen in this country talks to the state, monitored by the state. And I expect the same result to come from COVID-19, and just as with the Patriot Act, none of the technology or the surveillance tools that are going to be introduced are ever going to be rolled back or limited after we get a hand on the crisis. I think it's only just a part of we're going to hold the crisis and get it under control.
Yeah,
the U.S. government will not relinquish any powers it's been after the outbreak passes. It's tricky, though, because we did see how in China, for example, surveillance did contribute to their ability to curb the spread of coronavirus. Wonder if there's a way for monitoring to be done in an intelligent way, or if it can also be done in a way that's actually about managing the crisis. Because the difference between, I think, the U.S. government, Chinese government, at least in this instance, has been that the Chinese government continually seem to be trying to combat the spread of COVID-19 when I don't even see evidence that the U.S. government is really interested in doing that, because we haven't gotten any of the other testing, access to healthcare obviously universal, but you think there'd be some sort of emergency measures put in place during this health crisis to improve the system and make sure people were getting taken care of. And the U.S. government isn't doing any of that.
I heard the contrary. I heard we have the best testing, the most testing, all of the efficient testing in the entire world. So Donald Trump may disagree with you there, but no, to your more serious point there, is this rise of the surveillance states and how more people in the government are going to rely on it. And this tough question when we ask, because if technology can actually help solve the problem, don't we want to use it? But then at the same time, I get really afraid of some of these big tech entrepreneurs and companies, the Peter Thiels of the world, the Elon Musk of the world, who see government collapse as a goal of theirs so they can take over and run things themselves. And here we have these reports, Anya, about the Apple and Google releasing more details about how they would potentially preserve privacy with a new app and operating system change that would allow them to track COVID-19 symptoms and basically be able to follow people who need to be traced to see who they've had proximity and contact with. And Android and iPhone make up about 260 million users in the United States. And so these companies, if people buy into it, it's about a third of people saying that they would use these different apps to help surveil things. It shows that they're making a huge play for even more data when they're already collecting mass data with the help of the government. It seems like this just gives more power to these tech companies that are unchecked by the government. Jamal, you said you had already opted out of Android and smart iPhones using this app. But for me, in many ways, it seems like it's going to be used. It seems like people are going to be so desperate to get out of the house. People trust Apple and Google enough. They trust Google. I trust Google. Other people trust Google to store all of their data in their drives, to use their emails. Obviously, people have plenty of products by Apple. So these companies are trusted even though they act in nefarious ways. And when people are in their homes for another month or two and you say, download this app and you can go outside, again, I think people are going to be more than willing to hand everything over.
Yeah, they're going to do it. I don't think they're going to even think all that much twice about it. My issue, look, at the end of the day, the difficulty is it's hard to avoid these systems. As much as you might dislike Amazon, it is hard to not use Amazon, especially for some of this odd stuff out there, odds and ends, especially if you don't have a huge amount of bank in order to go to some of these boutique shops in order to get the item that you want. Well, the same thing is kind of true with Google. The moment that you engage with Google, it becomes difficult to not use the tools that Google provides you in order to get from point A to point B. Now, the catch here is whatever they're monitoring, you have to assume and you have to take their word for it that that information is either not going to be given over to some other entity, or for the most part that that information is not going to be aggregated in a way that you don't intend. And that's the issue. We should be able to own our own information to some degree, and it's like the laws haven't necessarily caught up with the way that these companies are able to accumulate this much data. And then they would be like, hey, here's the terms of service, 1,000 pages in tiny print. And it's like, sign it or, don't use our system. Like, it's that type of weird stuff. I think the issue and the problem with technology is that basically it's in the hand of the 1%. And because it's in the hand of 1%, you have people who basically only care about profit, don't necessarily believe they're going to be at the bad end of the technology that they're creating. And so they would create the surveillance equipment. They would create equipment that will scan individuals, like you said, a full body scan, maybe the eye scan, all of these things. And these things aren't necessarily done for public interest. They're done usually just for the sake of profit. And
shout out to Andrew Yang twice in our show. I want to own some of my data. Where's my data dividend?
That's
tomorrow?
right.
If you're going to make money off of it, give me some of that cash. And for me, it's frustrating. Thinking about how Amazon is using these heat maps to track people to see if they're potentially forming unions. It's kind of like the UFO stuff, Jamal, where I'm going to be really upset if it turns out it is us and the U.S. government has this technology, because these huge corporations have remarkable technology, have remarkable intellect. They're able to create the most imaginative things, and they use it for sociopathic purposes. Right. What's the point of using this technology to basically break the back of workers? What if we use that technology, for humanity, for the betterment of the world? All of the potentials, if we were using this stuff for good as opposed to evil, are thrown out the window because some people need to make a profit. I want to switch gears a little bit here, Jamal, and get back into the world of U.S. politics. Anya Parampal, with the independent journalist from the Gray Zone, continues to join us here. Anya, I want to make the pivot, and I say a slight pivot because she dropped again. We'll have to have her back on at another time tomorrow when our phone connections are a little bit more sturdy. I'm telling you, Jamal, you talk about the surveillance state on Radio Sputnik. The phone stopped working.
Gone.
People jump in and listen. It's not even on her. That's on the state that's listening. So shout out to all you FBI, CIA, NSA. They're probably all listening at this point. They're not coordinating together. So I'm sure they don't know exactly who listens on Wednesday, along with our great listeners at Political Misfits. But Jamal, I wanted to pivot and talk a little bit more about the Democratic Party and what they're doing there with Hillary Clinton. I, much like Joe Biden, did fall asleep while listening to Hillary Clinton endorse him yesterday to be the next president. I, too, found it incredibly boring.
Isn't that
sad? So now, though, you have...
That's so sad. Because like you said, he should have been well rested. You have a situation where Joe Biden is literally in a virtual town hall about women because he's trying to deal with the issue of him being accused of sexual assault. And in that meeting where he's being given accolades and given an endorsement from the highest profile woman in the Democratic Party, unconscious.
Yeah. And so for me, it's really kind of it's a flashback to the Obama years, the good old days, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Pelosi's, all working together to move things forward. And what's really kind of interesting here is the legacy of Barack Obama coming into office while Wall Street was collapsing in the moment. And now all of a sudden here in 2020, you have a presidential campaign again where the economy will not be doing well despite whatever Donald Trump thinks he's going to do. So you have another moment of great economic uncertainty for the Democrats to play savior. But if people remember whatsoever, Barack Obama didn't get into office and save Main Street. He bailed out Wall Street and the big banks. So what's Joe Biden going to say? Basically, put me in, and just like Obama, I'll save the economy by sending more money to big banks.
See, I think this particular argument that the Democratic Party making here is insane. Basically, they're trying to say, look, we're going to talk about the economy, and we're going to point that the economy collapsed, and it's Donald Trump's fault that the economy collapsed. Now, the problem the problem here is you need to be able to say that again, Bob.
We lost you there for a second. I thought they were taking you out.
Oh, they were taking me out too? Uh-oh. They're taking me out too. No, what I was saying was the issue, part of the issue has to do with, the Democratic Party's thing. Yeah, their argument that basically the economy is Donald Trump's fault. and that they're going to use that to run on, saying, look at the economy collapse, it's all Trump's fault, he did it, etc. I don't think that's going to work. I mean, you can make that argument under Bush with there's a financial crash and everything else. But the problem here is the public is perfectly aware that there was a coronavirus. Before the coronavirus hit, the public would have said the economy is doing fine under Donald Trump. Even now, with the economy collapsing, with all of these jobs lost, the public still believes, if you're looking at polling, that Trump is better on the economy than Joe Biden. Like, I don't think they get the bang for the buck in this, because you have an excuse that you can make of saying, look, this wasn't my fault. The economy was doing great before this happened. The issue is the coronavirus. And I think that's a passable argument, a plausible argument for Trump to make.
It seems a lot like you kind of need like a black and white contract things a little bit more. If you're offering kind of the Donald Trump Republican light as a neoliberal Democrat, people aren't going to understand those nuances. Where Bernie Sanders said, the system's corrupt, I'm offering a complete alternative, join me over here. But Biden's confusing this message. I mean, even around something like healthcare, when he's like, oh, the Medicare for all who want it, the Pete Buttigieg line, and some people get it, others won't. Nobody gets into the weeds and can nuance economic policy. Vast majority of analysts and others don't know what is happening with the economy. Most people just look at the Dow Jones and let them guide them. But again, that's not how political economy works. And I don't think Joe Biden really has a clearly articulated message of what the economy will be. And the economy, for as bad as it has been propped up in many ways. The unemployment numbers are skewed in many ways. But in the end of the day, on paper, the economy looks relatively strong under Donald Trump. And if Joe Biden's not able to differentiate a different plan, it's not going to much matter. And it's still 6-7 months out. I don't think the economy is going to have this dramatic upturn. I think because the Federal Reserve and how they're dumping huge amounts of money into the big corporations, that those Wall Street numbers may stay up. I just can't imagine tens of millions of people who have just lost their jobs going back to work. I think at least a third of those folks are going to be completely out of business, especially as the economy contracted by 4.8%, probably by more than 15% in reality. So the economy right now is terrible, Jamar. The question will be whether or not it rebounds come November, and if people solely pin that on Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's the question. And I got to be honest, I think both of those are no. I mean, a 4.8% contraction is massive, and that's just, a month and a half? So it's like we're literally just in the beginning of this, and you're talking about 26 million people losing their jobs. 43% of the population either having loss of wages or lost a job. That number is astonishing. And depending on where you are, that number gets worse. So in Los Angeles, you have half of the population that is missing a job. Or I think in Wisconsin or Michigan, one of those. I think it's like 22% in Michigan of people are no longer employed. Like, these numbers are astonishingly high. And these people have to find a way to make ends meet. And this, by the way, it was bad even before the coronavirus. Even though Donald Trump may talk up the economy like it's doing great and everything else, the reality is that the economy is more than just Wall Street. A lot of the economy has to also think of it in these terms. What's more important to you as an individual? The fact that a person makes $1 billion, or you having a decent life and people like you having a decent life? I would wager to you that most people would consider a decent economy with their ability to take care of themselves, their ability to make ends meet without being perpetually vulnerable. That is different than how somebody with $1 billion may regard the economy. So I hate this talk where they always point to the economy as being expansion, like forever expansion. Nothing expands forever. Like, this notion of infinite growth on a finite planet is obscene. Like, it doesn't even make logical sense. But that's what they run with. So you're right. Part of the problem that the Democratic Party has is that its base of supporters, the people who they actually need to get, are the people who are the most dejected with politics, because they're the people who need help the most, but realize that the support and the engagement that they give to the political space is not remunerated in regards to either policy that makes their lives better. And so they disengage from a political process, which makes the Democratic Party that much more likely to lose. By the same token, it also makes it that much more likely to pick a centrist in that process. Like, it's all of it is like race to the bottom.
And they'll pick somebody to the center, right? I mean, I was hate listening to Pod Save America, and those, and it's just I just hate listening to them because they're people that are on the quote unquote center left, Jamal. And I'm always told we got to compromise and listen to people that are different than us, even though these schmucks never actually listen to anybody to their left, and the coolest bros in the room interviewing people in their khakis, talking to DeRay McKesson and Katy Perry. and the basically hearing these people spin Joe Biden, even the stuff that's so dishonest. They were talking about Beau Biden. They're like, he fought and died in war. And it's like, Beau Biden died because he had a brain tumor.
Right.
He didn't die in war. Biden's not some great father whose son sacrificed himself to war. It should be somebody that said didn't prevent his son going into fighting endless wars with no point and came home and died of a horrible medical disease. But besides the point. I can tell you more about how I really feel about these guys later. But in the episode tomorrow, they were talking about the brilliance of economic advisor Larry Summers.
Oh, wow.
Despite Larry Summers being a right-wing economist within their narrow neoliberal bubble. And in the podcast, there were two things. One, they did not mention Summers' close ties with Jeffrey Epstein. And two, they bashed lefties and Sumner's haters for basically overly focusing on one advisor when Biden will, of course, as they said, look to be advised from people across the spectrum. Both the lack of mentioning Epstein and this notion that Joe Biden et al. Are somehow listening to left-wing economic advisors, Jamal, is incredibly dishonest. They're not going to listen to all different types of voices. You pick a few advisors who are within some type of general range of agreement, maybe some internal disagreements, but it's not like Biden's bringing in Democratic socialists to talk about a socialist perspective to the economy. He's bringing in Larry Summers and others like him.
Yeah, he's not bringing in Stephanie Kelton. You know, it's like he's going to choose people with a very specific ideology around the world. Think for the moment of, what's the gentleman's name? When Obama got in and you found out behind the scenes that Citigroup chose Obama's cabinet. Like, I don't know why Joe Biden would be drastically different from that standpoint. He is running on this notion of another term of Obama. So Biden has clear political allegiances from the standpoint of cash and wealth, and Larry Summers is just emblematic of that. I've said before, people of policy. The people who they put in, meaning if you don't know anything about the person's foreign policy or domestic policy when they get in office, look at the people who they're hiring. They're not hiring somebody with a drastically different point of view than they have. The fact that Summers is being added is a big deal. We have a caller.
Yeah.
Let's go to Stedman. Stedman, can you hear me?
Yes.
How's it going, man? What's up for the day?
Well, I'm just calling. I'm a couple times. I'm from Detroit, live in Michigan, so you guys are talking about Justin Amash, and I just wanted to give some input of him, kind of more personal perspective. So he's from the west side of the state, Grand Rapids, where's Betsy DeVos is from, and so they kind of have an outsized control on state politics, conservative control on state politics. The charter school situation, the way they fund things. And, I mean, he's just a typical racist Republican, even though his parents are from the Middle East, they're Christian. So, I mean, when you know about the immigration of the Middle East, the Christian Middle Eastern people were able to come over here first. There are a lot of Syrians in Michigan, a lot of people from Lebanon, a lot of people from the Middle East in Michigan, specifically Metro Detroit. I mean, he's been able to kind of become a white person because he's a Christian. He grew up a Christian. If you looked at him, you would not assume he was from the Middle East. And he's a racist. I mean, he's just a racist white guy. He voted down the federal lynching. He voted against making lynching a federal crime because he said it was a states' rights issue.
Wow.
So, I mean, he's a libertarian for big business. He's a libertarian, like, you know, when it's beneficial for whoever funds his campaign. He's not against Donald Trump because of any policy. I think you look at what he said and kind of the fact that he's fine with the DeVosses. He's fine with Michigan conservative politics in general. I mean, look up Grand Rapids, look up the DeVosses. Her husband, Dick DeVos, ran for governor in, I think, 04 or something like that, or maybe 02.
Stedman, let me ask you, Stedman, because in those polls they did last year, they actually showed that Amash did more damage to pull voters away from Joe Biden than from Donald Trump. Do you think that poll would return the same types of results this year?
Yeah, I think that'd be more accurate because the people who are voting for Donald Trump aren't the kind of people who would have voted for Joe Biden in the first place. And so you're going to see, I think, with Amash and with his whole base is trying to cater to suburban decency voters those aren't the kind of people that voted for Donald Trump. Who voted for Donald Trump in Michigan are people, and this is one of the things with Bernie's numbers going down that I think is not being accounted for. I think a lot of people who supported Bernie, the working class rural areas who do not support him this year, are Donald Trump supporters. So they moved over. They thought Donald Trump was the better option. They've seen that Bernie wasn't going to fight for them. And so they've left Bernie and they went to Trump. They didn't go to Biden. Biden might have picked up a greater size than Hillary Clinton did. those voters who supported Bernie in 16, I think a lot of those guys went to Trump. They want somebody who's, I mean, they say it all the time, speaking their issues, they talks how they talk, thinks how they think. They want somebody who at least is giving the appearance that he's trying to up in the system, even though he's not. And, I mean, Amash is more of somebody who's trying to cater to, like I said, that suburban, educated conservative who believes America is a shining hill on the city, city on a hill, I'm sorry. Like, no, that's going to take voters away. Those conservatives who live here who will vote for Joe Biden because they don't like Trump are the same ones who vote for Amash because he's a libertarian, which is to say a conservative, and not Joe Biden. So, you know, Amash is against abortion. You know what I mean? So it's just like Amash he's just your typical Michigan Republican.
Yeah. Cool, Stedman. Thank you as always, Stedman, for giving us a call. It's greatly appreciated. Get in here 202-521-1320. And Jamal, I think that's the point there. Is if you're a true blood Republican, you don't want to vote for Donald Trump, you've had enough of it, and maybe you were leaning towards Joe Biden, and now all of a sudden you have a libertarian. Maybe that person votes for Amash as opposed to Biden. So it seems like this, no matter what the third party is, it ends up almost hurting Democrats more regardless of what side they're coming from.
But again, that's the only reason that's true is because there's so minor daylight between the two that it's hard to, like, if, you know, I've argued that blue, no matter who, is white privilege. That people who have difficulty and people who have a hard time engaging in the system and who are persistently vulnerable and everything else, they can't afford blue no matter who. They can't afford just any random Democrat that is not necessarily going to deal with the economic realities that the poor, the middle class, and that majority of the population deals with. And so if they're not, then the question becomes, why do you give them their support? And the answer becomes, well, half the country doesn't vote for a reason. If you're not going to be able to show a disparity, a clear disparity from an economic standpoint between what you believe versus what the other person believes, then yeah, anybody who gets into the race that may offer, you know, a variation in it, no, they don't necessarily want to vote for Trump, but maybe they don't want to vote for Joe Biden either, and having a third choice may actually pull those votes away, meaning it's unclear who this person hurts, even though ideally you would think it would hurt the Republicans since the person is coming from the right. But that's not entirely clear by this.
No, and I think in the weird horseshoe moment we're in, it would actually end up hurting Joe Biden a little bit more. I wanted to slide in another story here, Jamal, before we turn to our weekly revelations segment where we'll talk a little bit about psychedelics, which I'm greatly excited for. But as you mentioned, the lack of contrast between Republicans and Democrats, and without contrast, how are you supposed to pick or move from one party or to the other? And there's been one foreign policy issue that for me has been one of the biggest important issues of my lifetime that I've worked in the field of foreign policy, but that's been around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian land. And here now we have the United States and the Trump administration recognizing Israel's annexation of much of the occupied West Bank. But they did ask, of course, the new unity government also to negotiate with Palestinians, aka they said, once you steal all the Palestinian lands, make sure you send them a WhatsApp message to let them know the plan. This is another area which, to me, Jamal, would not change with a Democratic administration. Two moments I will always remember when I watched the Democratic Party basically sell out the Palestinians to the Israelis for me and turn me away from the party and was kind of the final death nails. The first was in 2007, I believe, when Hillary Clinton was talking at AIPAC, and she basically said, look, the Israeli and Palestinians will never find peace as long as all Palestinian leaders are violent. Wow. And at the time, I'm working with people that are nonviolent Palestinian leaders. And so for me, it was just disgusting to see her say something like that. And saying to myself, how am I supposed to work with these folks when they think all of my friends are violent leaders within the Palestinian activist community? I don't think 2007 is right. I'm trying to update my memory. I think maybe 2012. But nonetheless, to have the Secretary of the State, Hillary Clinton, come out and say all Palestinians are violent basically showed she had nothing but favoritism towards Israel. The second moment that always sticks out in my head was when Donald Trump was giving the State of the Union speech and he announced that the U.S. would move its capital to Jerusalem. And Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer basically jumped out of his chair with one of the biggest standing ovations I've ever seen anybody give. And so if you have two of your party leaders basically saying, go ahead, Israel, do whatever you want, where's the contrast there between the Trump administration and the Democratic administration? Sure, there's some minor differences, but overall, they're both playing Israel's lawyer and their backer. Who am I supposed to pick between in that situation?
Yeah, me neither. I mean, both of them are onerous on this issue. And, you know, it's not just favoritism, it's contempt. Look, I would argue, or I think most people would argue, that under German occupation, that the French had every right, philosophically and morally, in order to fight back the occupation of that country. You could say that that's a philosophical argument for violence, fair enough, but I don't necessarily think it's insane to say that if somebody's being attacked, they should be able to defend themselves. It is always the attacker, especially if the attacker is in a powerful position within a society, that makes the argument that it's the other person that's aggressive. When African Americans were sitting in, oh, they're being aggressive, they're being, angry and whatnot. Or in this case with the Palestinians, who some may push back on the fact that they're being disposed of or dispossessed of their land, or being attacked and killed, imprisoned, tortured and whatnot. Yeah, it's not insane to push back on that. But again, since you have these major media outlets in the United States that for the most part follows in line with whatever the government's policy is, well, you have this case where they're going to make that argument that Palestinians are uniquely violent, Palestinians are problematic, Palestinians won't come to the peace. All of this propaganda that these guys put out, the reality of it is that they have taken that land and they continue to steal more and more of that land. That's the reality of it. So it's like however Clinton wanted to cast that, that's the reality. Even the anti-BDS legislation, where they're literally attacking the First Amendment in order to try to stop people from their right to protest what Israel is doing in that region. The policies here are astonishing.
Yeah, it's all 50 U.S. governors have signed on. All 50 Democrat, Republican governors have signed on saying if you support BDS, we as the state can deny you grants. Makes sense of that one. Well, with that, we do need to turn to a quick minute break before coming back to talk about the revelations you may have and be able to have while on mushrooms and other natural psychedelics. It's Earth's treat to all of us. That and more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. You hear that sound. It is Wednesday. This is our Revelation segment, one of my favorite segments. So let's take the caller first, and then we can come back to the commentary. We have a caller who wants to comment on COVID. Well, better yet, let's hold this caller until a little bit later, and we'll get back to it. So we're joined by Seth Rosenberg of District Psychedelic. Seth is a student of the secret and not so secret history of natural psychedelic substances and press secretary and ethnogen expert of Decriminalized Nature DC. Seth, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. So we were having a conversation, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and we got really excited. At the very least, I got really excited about that conversation because it started to go into psychedelic experiences, the ideas of shamanism and working and using these tools of sorts in order to break through certain areas in your life, certain sticking points to deal with depression, to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, meaning people use this and almost to work on themselves in this kind of conscious way. Can you give us, you mentioned here, not so secret history and the secret history. What is the secret history of psychedelics?
Well, like so many things, there is the story that everybody knows, and then there's kind of what what really happened. And the story that everyone is sort of familiar with is that Gordon Wasson went down to Mexico with a shaman woman named Maria Sabina, who helped him to have his first psychedelic experience, and he brought back his experience and photographs and published in Nature magazine and called them magic mushrooms. And that's sort of where the West, where Europeans were first introduced to magic mushrooms. And Albert Hoffman, sort of shortly before, had discovered LSD and then figured out that it was a psychedelic. And Sandoz, which manufactured it at that time, started sending it out to psychiatrists all over the country, all over the world, really. And our current mythology is that's sort of where psychedelics came into being for Europeans, and that previous to that, it was indigenous people, like in Mexico, where we had to go, and sort of at the, coming from the realm of science. The reality is 27 different varieties of magic mushrooms grow in Europe. And I'm going to talk just about 2 countries. 22 grow in Germany and 10 grow in England. And between England and Germany, trade from the beginning of trade, they were in one of those 2 countries. They were every place, in prehistory. That's, there's no denying that that question becomes is for books, how many generations does it take to erase history?
Yeah.
Right?
Pretty much. No, I understand that. It's funny. I've had psychedelic experiences from the standpoint of like lucid dream states or OBEs. I've only used a psychedelic substance once. It was sativa dividorium. And I remember sitting there, I had my chessboard on the bed with me, and it felt like the entire world had a heartbeat, and it was beat with a certain bias towards a particular direction, and it felt like the chessboard and I had basically merged into one, and I'm sitting there just kind of like, wow, this is weird. What have been some of your most profound experiences dealing with this, dealing with, as a psychonaut and going into, and let me ask you this, what was the reason that you're using the substance? Like, are you using it for this kind of personal development and growth? And what have been some of your experiences while using these various substances?
Well, I mean, my story is sort of, as far as my experience with psychedelics, is sort of in 2 parts. The very first time when I first became familiar with psychedelics was when I was in high school in the 80s. And honestly, it's not a story that you hear very often, but I was pretty much a low C, D student until junior year. I started using cannabis regularly and experimenting with psychedelics. And that year, I enrolled in all my classes, and by senior year, I was at the top of my class and at the head of my student government.
Interesting. Now, why? Was it making you focus more, or was it giving you like a different perspective? Like, I give you a perfect example. When I used to play chess, I think it was in 6th grade, I used to lose all my games. And finally, at a tournament, it all clicked all at once, in which case I could dominate the entire room. But it was almost like a light switch going on. Was that kind of what was taking place? The using of the substances open your mind in a different way, or had you thinking about these things a different way, or did it just focus your thoughts in regards to doing what you needed to do?
I mean, here is the truth: is that I can only draw the correlation right now, looking back on it. At the time, it felt very much like I was doing something illegal, and it felt very much like something that I was, felt very guilty about, and it's something I absolutely ended up stopping by the end of high school, really. In looking back, when trying to figure out what took me from a depressed state in early high school to a successful state later in high school, as I'm understanding what we're learning now about psychedelics and neurogenesis and how it is something that helps with anxiety and how it can really help to you different perspectives on how to look at everything, and also make you more comfortable in your environment, which as a teenager is a really huge thing. And I'm not advocating children doing drugs. I'm not suggesting anybody underage go out and do anything. I'm talking for now, if we're going to talk about what I recommend, I'm only going to talk about for adults of consenting age. And consent is a really, really big issue with psychedelics. I mean, and I just don't think kids can do that. So I want to be really clear about that. And I made some decisions that I can't defend necessarily, but, you know, here we are. So there's that part. And then I took a break for a long, long time. And for me, I've been an amateur mycologist for a long time, sort of a citizen scientist. I'm just passionate about all things mushroom. And if I start talking about that, it's going to get really long. So I'm just going to say that eventually through my mycology and mushroom studies, I heard a lecture from Albert Garcia Romu, who was one of the therapists at Johns Hopkins University. And he was working on a cigarette smoking cessation study. And at the time I was smoking cigarettes and I really wanted to stop. And I had a real tough time doing it. And
yeah, isn't that amazing? It is amazing to see how basically we've legalized some drugs, like cigarettes are somehow legal, even though they give you cancer and kill you. And cannabis is slowly but surely, hopefully, going to be legalized. And then you also have things like alcohol, which is incredibly dangerous. And I thought it was interesting. There was a story that was shared by us about how beer is prohibited for certain reasons as opposed to psychedelics. I was hoping, Seth, you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, great. Beer is something, and I spoke to your producer, Michelle, a little bit about this. You know, one of my favorite things about sort of how psychedelics have been portrayed and you know, and misaligned is when we talk about the German beer purity laws. And that is something, you know, we've heard time and time again as boys, that's the standard for like the best beer in the world. They get water, hops, yeast, and malt or whatever it is, barley. That's it, and that's all they put in, and they are so proud. The truth is that was created because people were putting psychedelics into their beer, and
interesting.
Psychedelics are they help you to question things. They leave you to, you know, question what's going on and question authority, and they make you feel connected to your environment and your community and the world around you. But alcohol dulls your senses. It helps you to make really bad decisions. We've all done that. It makes you more compliant. It leaves you exhausted the next day. You know, cigarettes are the same thing. It's, you know, it's nice to have, but, you know, when you're decreasing your oxygen intake, you're tired. You know, you're a tired person if you're a smoker. I did it for a long time, you know. So the drugs that they make legal are the drugs that leave you groggy and make bad decisions and addicted. So you are broken, groggy, and tired. And that's
and
really...
obviously the politics around who's using certain drugs also plays another role in the state oppression and surveillance and legalization of people's actions, or illegalization to say it more accurately. I want to get a caller in here. I'm not sure if it's cheddar, or there's another way to pronounce it, but hopefully you're here with us now.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, guys. I just wanted to say that I went through a period of like 15 years of really, really, really bad depression. And so eventually I decided to get acid. I went through a period of like a year where I did it like a dozen times. The best way I can describe it is like the opposite of like PTSD, like such a profoundly, traumatically good experience. It leaves a lasting impression. So for someone with like chronic depression, it's just like, it's so good to have that memory of like a really profoundly, you know, joyous occasion. Wow, you know, life can be good. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Cheater. I appreciate it. Seth, I'm curious about your own spiritual experiences with the plants. Can you give us one of those, maybe one of your most profound experiences?
Here is the thing about that is that honestly, I think that describing the psychedelic experience is something I prefer not to do specifically for two reasons. One is it gets really dull after you've heard it a few times. And two is I don't want to color anybody's experience as to what's out there. But here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that I, like almost everyone who has had a positive experience with with psychedelics. Specifically, my focus is mushrooms, and more specifically, which happen, by the way, to be growing wild all over Washington, D.C., 2 different varieties at this very moment.
But can you mention that real quick? I was amazed to see the list of different mushrooms and the varieties around the world and where they grow, and obviously the different strands will have different impacts. So tell us a little bit more about the varieties there that you have.
I will do that, but let me just finish this thought on the spirituality aspect of it. And I feel like the communication from the mushrooms. I mean, I know it's hippy-dippy stuff, and I don't get into a lot of woo-woo, and I don't try and get into new age this or that or any of it. For me, when I go out and I can find a mushroom that's growing in the wild, I can't stand people talking about connecting with nature. You're not connecting with nature. You are nature. You are an animal foraging for medicine, and you are out in the woods looking for this mushroom. You are nature. That is what you're supposed to do. This is the most nature you've ever been in your life. And when you make that connection and you can find your own medicine, that medicine will speak to you, and it will be a really positive experience. And I think that, controlling how you get your medicine and how it's taken and the environment that you're in, which everyone refers to as set and setting, is tremendous. But, every person who has had a life-altering experience, and to be very clear, that isn't everybody. There's a lot of people who don't, and there are people who have bad times and don't like it, and that it needs to be really clear. I'm not pie in the sky about that. I've seen it happen. There's plenty of people who it's just not going to work for. But for the people that do, there's a connectivity and a harmony and a connection to nature and a feeling that they understand their place in the universe better than they did ever before. That's huge.
I'm curious, Bob. You were mentioning the notion of depression and those type of things. Did you want to get into that, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of curious how the different strands can possibly treat different ailments or give you different outputs after you use them. Obviously, each body has a different different makeup organically. So I was curious, tell us a little bit about the different strands and how they may have different impacts on one person taking it.
What I'll talk about then is I'm going to go to decriminalize nature, which is where I'm doing press for. And to be clear, everything I've spoken about really has been me, district psychedelic. And now I'm going to talk about stuff that we're talking about in decrim nature, because we're talking about a couple of things there. We're talking about ayahuasca. We're talking about psychedelic mushrooms. We're talking about mescaline-bearing cactus, and we're talking about DMT. And also ibogaine. Ibogaine is an amazing drug, and we don't know how to use it really to our fullest extent. But there are people who are using it who have learned a lot about it, and it is a devastatingly powerful psychedelic that is not used by anybody I've ever heard of recreationally, and is one of the most effective treatments for opioids that exists.
I'm curious, what do you think about DMT as a spirit molecule? There's a book, I think it's called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, where the author is making the argument that at the point of your death, DMT is released. And he's postulating that based on some of the experiences of the people who they were having during his test cases, they were basically giving people DMT in order to figure out their experiences and what they were experiencing and those type of things. That he was postulating that the connectivity between this kind of mind or this body-soul connection is delivered through the DMT experience. What do you think about that? I'm curious.
Okay, I'm going to step back out of the decrim nature and back into me. There's no question in my mind that white light at the end of the tunnel is DMT. No question.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I'm sorry.
I have a near-death experience in the woods. I'm hopefully, 50, 100 years away from that. But I have had a DMT experience, and there is absolutely nothing that can prepare you for that. It is beyond anything you could comprehend. Absolutely.
Interesting. That is massively interesting.
Again, if you do it, guaranteed.
Bob, any more questions, Bob?
No, that's all I got. I'm curious about DMT and checking more of it out. That was an incredible interview, Seth. I want to make sure our listeners know where they can find more of your work and help support the campaigns you're behind. Tell us a little bit more how people can follow you and learn more about the work you're doing.
Right now, honestly, my website is under construction. Hopefully that'll be done by the weekend. But if you want to go to decrimnaturedc.org, we can use help from anybody and everybody. And it really doesn't matter where you are in the country. If you want to show up online, we could use your help in some way, as far as hearing your stories, or, every single person that can come out and let it be known that they've used psychedelics to help themselves, and they're not ashamed of it, and they don't want to be, treated with, the stigma for taking care of their mind. Every single person that comes out, every person that all their friends think is a square, but went and did an ayahuasca retreat and, found the peace that they had been looking for 30 years. Every person in the LGBTQ community who has really struggled with themselves and has found peace, by having an experience like this. And also people of color. We need people of color in leadership positions in this movement. Otherwise, there won't be people of color in leadership positions in this movement. So everybody who wants to participate, please do come forward, because when we invite everybody, we really mean everybody. Please, 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 if you want to participate, we do want to hear. Again, decrimnaturedc.org.
That's great. That was Seth Rosenberg of District Psychedelic and expert for Decriminalized Nature DC. With that, we'll take a quick break here on Political Misfits, Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
The most important hour of the day. It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schleiber here with Jamarl Thomas. We close out our day here with you, Political Misfits. We're going to close our show out at 2 o'clock, but after this, you have By Any Means Necessary with one of the best voices on radio, Sean Blackman, along with one of the best minds on radio, Jacqueline Lukeman. I wanted to first slide in a caller before we get to our last stories here. Lori, are you still with us? Thank you for patiently waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey, guys. I did enjoy your guest you just had on. Very interesting. Great guest. My call was about something else. I hope this doesn't sound too out there, but like with Jamarl, I don't think anything that's too out there. So, so I have been looking into a little bit the numbers, the number of people that have been diagnosed with COVID-19, the death rate for COVID-19, and there is a lot of weird stuff out there that makes me very suspicious about how truly dangerous COVID-19 is and whether the measures that are being taken, all the shutdowns, et cetera, are actually necessary. And, when you had what is her name? Parapomal from the Gray Zone on. About the intrusive measures that are being started up by our government and all of this stuff. I'm amazed that nobody in my progressive media channels has started looking into this. When you going into the actual data, there's a ton of red flags that there's a lot of false information on the whole picture.
Thank you, Lori. Lori, thank you so much for the call. Let me first just kind of address where the numbers are going to change, and I think that's factual. I mean, we do have 50,000 plus deaths here in the United States and the New York of how it's been hit. Talk to people there. Obviously, the virus is deadly and the symptoms from it are horrific. I think what's going to happen, Jamal, is the number and frequency of which people die from the disease will drop. In the United States and around the world, the only people that are primarily being tested are those with the virus. And so many of the death numbers that are being reported are only being reported based on those who've actually been tested and found to have the virus. What they're not factoring in, though, is those who are asymptomatic. And what we've seen from LA County and in New York from the early studies, there are a lot of people, some 400,000 in LA County, millions of people in New York who have had COVID-19 and that were never showing symptoms from it. So when you actually factor all of those people in, redo the math, the death rate's going to be dramatically lower. It seems like it'll fall somewhere above the seasonal flu, but it's not as deadly as people had once thought. But the disease is surely rapidly spreading. I mean, over 1 million cases here in the United States, some 3.1 million cases around the world. And so it's spreading much quicker. I don't know what comes afterwards when it comes to the surveillance state, when it comes to robbing the banks, when it comes to certain measures that the government may take under the guise of this and that needing to take place. But surely the coronavirus is taking hold and it's killing people at a rapid rate.
It is. And multiple things can be true at once. Meaning 9/11, yes, was an attack on our buildings. By the same token, they also used it in order to invade the Middle East and reshape the Middle East regarding foreign policy. Both of those things just so happen to be true. Well, the same thing is true with this. You can have a lot of people who are asymptomatic, in which case those people don't get tested because they were asymptomatic. You can also have a lot of people at this point, 1 million, 448,000. Like, you can have a massive number of people who are showing symptoms who get tested, and your death rate. At this point, we've had 60,495 people to die. Look, the issue here is that you want to keep that number down. You don't want to get to a situation where this number gets out of control and your hospitals are slammed. You don't have enough resources and supplies. Even now, in many of these states, they didn't have enough resources. They didn't have ventilators, vaccines, none of that stuff. So the issue is not so much that the disease is not either as infectious or is not as bad. The issue is we don't know. And the last thing you don't want is to be in a situation where you decide to blow off this notion of social distancing or not do it at all, and you end up with a lot of people slamming your hospitals and dying. I mean, based on incompetence of Trump, we have over 1 million people that are ill with over 60,000 that have died. So, I don't necessarily think it's a horrible idea to say, in order to preserve life and limb, let's shut down these businesses for a while. The issue here is that you need to make sure people are whole so they're not necessarily desperate when you do it.
It's interesting, too, Jamar, that I saw somebody posting about how Trump wasn't wearing a mask similar to Mike Pence at one of the press briefings. And they're like, they must know something. They're in on it. They know something going on. And it's like, how do we have the George W. Bushes and the Donald Trumps of the world that are complete idiots day in and day out, but somehow they can mastermind some of the greatest conspiracies the world has ever seen? Like, we somehow give them credit to be able to think like that. On the note of Donald Trump and his competence, Jamal, I had predicted here the last month or so that the numbers would eventually catch up to Donald Trump the longer COVID-19 continued. There's a new poll out here from Emerson College that showed Donald Trump's approval rating in handling of the coronavirus has dropped 10 points from last month. 39% of those surveyed approved of Trump's efforts to tackle the outbreak, a drop from 49% a month ago. The poll released Tuesday found that 51% said they disapproved of the president's handling of the virus, a jump from 41% in March. The president's overall approving rating has ticked downward since last month, dropping from 46% to 41%. The drop comes after Trump's overall approval rating leapt into new highs before dropping down to the low to mid 40s range have consistently been stuck there since 2017. Tomorrow, Virginia just announced that they would maintain social distancing into June. That's another month. I got to imagine those approval ratings for Trump will continue to slide into the 30s.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have any issue with the social distancing policy in a short period of time. And yeah, Donald Trump's, the policies that he's taken. One of the things that was interesting in one of the other research papers, they were making the point that the public didn't believe Trump. That from the standpoint of, I think it was like 30-something%, that they trusted what he was saying on the virus. Biden's numbers were even lower than that. But they did trust like the CDC, Fauci, the scientists that were involved in this. And so, but they didn't believe Trump. which means that when you have a large number of lives that were lost or a large number of people infected, you have an economy that's being stalled, and you don't believe the president, the point person for it. Like, I don't, like, how do you rise up in that situation? It looks like the only place that you can go is down. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, the knee jerk obviously was to support the president, but as things continue on, people's patience are waning, to say the least.
Exactly.
Jamal, with that, we have to get out of here for the day. Big thanks to Seth Rosenberg, Anya Parampil, and Brandon Sutton for joining us today. A big thank you, as always, to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team keeping us live here daily on Radio Sputnik. Shout out to our wonderful producer, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, Bob Schlaber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, I appreciate you guys showing up. Let me get the volume straight. All right, perfect. Yeah, guys, I always appreciate you guys showing up for the show. Political Misfits, Bob Schlehuber, Jamal Thomas. We have chat. Let's Arlene Chambers. Surprised. Oh, surprised Obama is okay with Joe Biden tarnishing his legacy. Interesting, right? Interesting. I mean, that was the thing that Joe Biden, that Obama said, don't let Joe screw up my legacy. Well, look, you know, there's a question of why didn't Obama back Joe Biden early on? Joe Biden was literally his vice president. Obama would have known Joe Biden better, was just as well as anybody else. And in a situation where he had all of those people in the field, Obama stayed out of it and wouldn't necessarily back Biden. Is it possible that Biden or Obama knew what he was getting with Joe Biden and decided he did not want to, that he didn't necessarily want to go into the notion of backing him? Like you say, he didn't want his legacy tarnished. And so if there was somebody else that might have been able to pop their head up, Obama probably would have been perfectly happy as long as that person wasn't Sanders and perhaps maybe not even Warren in order to make that work. So, yeah, supposedly he wasn't supposed to mess up his legacy, but here we are. Loy Mountain Girl. Jamal, could you get Ryan from Last American Vagabond to talk about the COVID-19 thing? I don't know who Ryan is, if I'm being honest. But I have to be honest, I don't buy the conspiracy theories around this. It's an illness. Things happen. Pandemics happen. Republicans and even Democrats want to get people back to work because they don't want to ensure that the welfare of the public is taken care of. And in this case, their owner class is basically trying to make them vulnerable while using this kind of manipulation in order to get people to do something that is against their interests. I don't buy the idea that this isn't a real thing or that this is not dangerous. You have a large number of people who are dropping dead from this, which kind of belies the point that it's not as bad. But I will end this here. Like, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys in a few. We always have a meeting after work, so.